Hey everybody, it's Big Mike. I am here today with Logan Davis, reporter with I keep doing that, the Colorado Times Recorder. It's hard to say, reporter with the Colorado Times Recorder. Uh, but Logan, go ahead, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, man. I am Logan Davis. I am a reporter with the Colorado Times Recorder. For a long time, I worked in Democratic politics. I still do some research consulting outside of Colorado, so outside of the area that I cover, because I really think that very little matters in politics as much as information. It's the same reason I started writing after having been a consultant for a long time. I really think that the flow of information is kind of the determinative thing in politics, and I like being a part of it and assisting information in moving where I think it needs to go. And so recently, that's been a lot of reporting on ICE stuff. We have, for many years at CCR, covered the sort of broader right wing extremist scene. We were very busy post January 6th, identifying a lot of those folks. The FBI came to my house about Tina Peters many years ago. I've had my fingers in a variety of weird right wing extremist pies in Colorado for quite some time, and am currently, like you said, devoting my interest in those things to writing and reporting, which has been pretty rewarding.
Gotcha. And do you have any further background in journalism? Did you study journalism? What's your studious background?
I studied moral philosophy. I was like a liberal arts kid. I'm from Nashville, Tennessee, originally, and but I've been in Colorado since 2013. And no, I like studying moral philosophy. I think that that is absolutely how I get into politics, right? Like social movements and what people believe and why they believe it. And I've always enjoyed writing. That's kind of like the liberal arts thing. But no, I was never really I did more like political press work with journalists before becoming one than anything, right? Like trying to like pitch stories and create stories. And a lot of that's how I learned to appreciate the importance of information in politics, that and kind of oppo research stuff. But really there's sort of a frustration with the press corps. I love and respect a ton of reporters, but there's certain things that it's just really difficult to get them to sink into things that have to do with political finance. It's like an immediate glaze over. It was always only Sandra Fish in the Colorado Press Corps who could really do anything with finance, and Sandra is mostly retired now, which she deserves. But things like that, and then the prioritization of access over a lot of other things, I think, has jeopardized a lot of good local political coverage. And then you have things like Alden Global owning the Denver Post, and the Denver Post has some amazing staff writers who are not allowed to spend time investigating anything because they are being made to churn out so much content by their hedge fund owner that a lot of stuff just goes totally uncovered. So I kind of got sick of knowing a lot of the inside secrets, and everybody else not knowing those. And so I figured I would start telling a lot of those stories and reporting news stories. So it is out of both respect for and a little bit of frustration with what local political coverage has become that I started trying my hand at it a few years ago. And now somehow I'm an award winning investigative journalist, and all of that kind of happened by accident.
So yeah, I do want to get deeper into the ethics of journalism and things a little bit later,
Yeah.
but I want to start off with the main story and what you guys kind of discovered and blew up, these secret ice holding facilities all over the country. So give us a quick rundown. What did you guys find, and how is it related to the bigger story with ice right now?
So what we have found basically is a massive expansion of ICE detention facilities. These hold rooms, there are at least 170 of them nationwide. A lot of them are in like field offices or, little rented spaces in strip malls. They are governed by different detention standards under ICE's own standards. They are not allowed to contain beds. They are not required to contain toilets. There needs to be access to running water at some point, but that can be a guard taking you. Um, Nobody is supposed to be held in hold rooms for longer than 72 hours. Until last June, the limit was 12 hours. They turned it to 72 hours at the same time that ICE tripled its arrest quota last uh, last June. And as a result, people are being held in these facilities for much longer than 72 hours. We looked at data from, first of all, the data comes from the Deportation Data Project, which operates out of Berkeley. And they are data scientists who have basically, for a few years now, been FOIAing and subsequently suing the Department of Homeland Security to get their hands on this data. They should have, they're engaged in more litigation right now. So there's more data coming at some point. Right now, the data we have ends in October of 2025. We looked at the best data set goes from September 2023 to October 2025. So it allowed us to compare some Biden and Trump data. You are never going to catch me defending the mainstream Democratic Party's approach towards immigration, and you're never going to catch me saying that Joe Biden was not cruel to immigrants in some ways that he could have avoided being. I think that's just kind of the nature of the beast. But the difference between the Biden era data and the Trump era data is unbelievable. Um, in the last 16 months of the Biden administration, there were 281 people who were held in hold rooms for longer than 72 hours. In the first 10 months of the Trump administration, that goes from 281 to 5,011. So it's almost a 20 fold increase in these overlong detentions in these inhumane facilities. Anyway, this is a long way of saying there are 170 of them nationwide. This first became known like last October, November, when the Deportation Data Project released some of this data. At that point, The Guardian briefly reported on it, but didn't dive into a lot of the specifics. And when we came along, we were kind of surprised to see the lot of this data had not been reported on yet. So we just kind of undertook to do it. We first reported on the 9 hold rooms here in Colorado, and the 2,800, 3,000-ish people held in them last year. And then we expanded that to the 170 hold rooms around the nation and the 140,000 people held in them last year.
So, and we're talking about um, people being held for extended periods of times, no beds, possibly no toilet, possibly no access to running water for up to what, 72 hours. Um,
It's supposed to be up to 72 hours. Unfortunately, one guy was held in the Denver hold room for 39 days. Somebody was held in the Newark hold room in New Jersey for 292 days. No
it's
bed.
almost a year.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no bed. These things, the few photos that have been sneaked out of some of them by like immigration attorneys who got some photos of the hold room at the Chrome facility outside of Miami in Florida, it just kind of looks like a bus stop with a ton of people crammed in there, sometimes under Mylar blankets, but like it's just benches and people kind of folded up on the floor trying to sleep under these bright fluorescent lights.
And how do these facilities differ from the larger, like the Geo facility in Aurora? What are the differences? Um, do the larger ones? Because I've heard these are also pretty inhumane themselves. What are the major differences there?
Yeah, I think that there's probably not an ideal ice holding facility anywhere, right? Like they kind of famously keep the temperature very low in a lot of them. There's a lot of abuses going on even at the more official facilities. And of course, Geo Group itself has been accused of human rights violations, right? Like this is not unfortunately these hold rooms are at kind of a bad end of an already bad spectrum. Um, one of the main differences is that these facilities being totally ad hoc, there aren't, for instance, there's no access to medical care. And that's something that's really concerning to us. We know that a 91-year-old was held in one of the Colorado hold rooms last year. These are just in offices, right? At the Geo, like they're accused of human rights violations, don't get me wrong, but there's also medical personnel on site. There is a clinic. The things that official detention facilities and jails have, do they just have to hope that somebody being held in a strip mall in Frederick overnight doesn't have a heart attack? It seems very callous that these people are kept without access to these basic things. And then, of course, things like access, ready access to a toilet and running water and a bed. Even in these horrible facilities, many people do have, a cot to sleep on. And there's something that feels psychologically torturous about keeping somebody for weeks and months at a time without a bed, in particular, feels pretty brutal. it, if we can also assume that the same sort of mistreatment that we know of in official detention facilities is happening in these hold rooms, it's then that plus the indignity and physical discomfort and physical stressors of long periods of time confined in a small space with no bed. I mean, that's um, there are ways that you can interpret that that do fall under definitions of torture that are accepted by the United Nations.
And have you guys been able to track anyone down who was kept in these facilities? Have you spoken to anyone who was inside?
We have not. We have spoken to some immigration attorneys off record. There is a great deal of sensitivity surrounding individuals. Everybody still has, family in the country. Everybody who we have sort of approached about this is very worried about retribution. And the immigration attorneys who have been very helpful in understanding what we're seeing, they, of course, also don't want to be named because they don't want their clients to end up being targeted. And that's been really striking. One reason we chose to report this, we held off our initial reporting on the for the 9 Colorado hold rooms for like an extra week, really trying to find people to speak on record. And a lot of the conversations I had that week were very helpful and very illuminating and very off record for reasons that I sort of came to understand as we were going, which is that there is a um, large and I think very justified amount of concern of just pernicious retribution from the federal government.
Understood. And you were able to track down the owners of these buildings, the landlords, and I believe you spoke to one of them, a German lawyer. Can you tell us about him and what he had to say?
Yes, his name is Hans Hegerl. Um, I've been thinking about him this week because he was an interesting one. Hegerl owns the building that holds the Alamosa hold room, which has only had about 50-ish people pass through it last year. It's the least used in the state. It is, of course, still an ice hold room. In emailing with Mr. Hegerl, because he lives in Cologne, Germany. He likes to visit Colorado. He has some friends here, but he's like a full-time German national, works there, lives there. He was able to give me some insight into what it looks like to rent to the federal government. All of these leases are just with the GSA, right? Like nobody really signs a lease with ICE. It's always with the General Services Administration, which is effectively the federal government's landlord. And for Hegerl, he actually bought that building off of some other Germans like 20 plus years ago. And it doesn't seem to have been an ICE or DHS facility until maybe 2010 or 11, but he has only ever been told GSA. He came to know at some point that ICE was in there. He's currently working on selling the building, is my understanding. But basically, he has this building that has a GSA lease, and the GSA just kind of puts whoever they want in there. Um, the fact that most of the other landlords chose not to speak and chose not to return my calls and not return my emails. They all certainly know now that ICE is operating their buildings, and some of them clearly knew. I got through to Bruce Timberg, the man who owns the one in Craig. We spoke briefly enough for him to confirm that he absolutely knows that ICE is his tenant, but he wouldn't confirm anything else about that. So there is some opacity, even for these landlords. We know in my home state of Tennessee, there was some ICE was straight up, or GSA was straight up lying to some landlords about whether or not ICE would be in the building. So even as they continue expanding, they're being a little sneaky about it. But I do think that the bottom line is that these landlords do seem aware that ICE is operating their facilities, what they're being used for, at least now, after all our calls and voicemails, and have not chosen to address that publicly, which I think sort of speaks for itself.
Now, did Heggerl specifically, Germany is a signatory to multiple UN, human rights legislation, I suppose you could call it. Was Heggerl concerned about, human rights violations happening on property he owns? Because as a German citizen, he is subject to things of international law that most U.S. citizens would not be.
He did seem he seemed concerned, not necessarily in a sense of his legal exposure. I think he seemed, perhaps I'm pulling up that email. He seemed Like you would assume of many Germans, many Europeans, he seemed to not want to have any association with the Trump administration. I think was sort of one of the things that leapt off the page pretty quickly. We emailed back and forth for several days because we're in radically different time zones. He did seem concerned about that. He says he doesn't hold a green card. He's purely just been like a foreign investor in this. He really stressed that he has like no ties to the administration, and I certainly couldn't find any. He seemed concerned as a guy who just kind of like bought this building from some fellow Germans a quarter century ago and doesn't think about it much and recently learned that there might be human rights violations occurring at it, which has got to be a weird experience. He did express that he is hopeful that any illegal actions in the building will be prosecuted. I think he showed a little bit more faith in the American legal system than I
I was
would.
gonna say I wouldn't hold
Yeah,
my breath on that one.
yeah, but so he certainly he seemed both concerned and interested in distancing himself, but it didn't seem entirely self-interested to me. And I think there is still culpability on Hegerl's part, but I he expressed at least a little something that none of the others chose to.
Gotcha. And protests have started outside of some of these, and I believe they are trying to, make sure and kind of hold these people accountable for, at least trying to keep people there for a shorter period of time. What are the goals of these protesters, and have they had any success?
The ones who I have been in contact with most are from the group No Concentration Camps in Colorado, which is it's a coalition of other activist groups, which includes like Indivisible, 5051, and a bunch of other smaller groups. So plenty of people who have planned some of these No Kings protests. They've been super diligent, particularly at the Frederick Holdroom north of Denver, where they're keeping pretty much a constant vigil. One of them told my colleague Keith last week when Keith went out to that protest at the Frederick facility that they want to be a deterrent, right? They want to have eyes on that facility all the time because what they're really concerned about is are these overlong holds people being held longer than 72 hours, and to hear them say they think the more eyes they can keep on these buildings, the better idea they can have of how often people are coming and going. The protesters at the Frederick facility last week got photographs of children's car seats being in the garage there where they keep the fleet cars. We know children have been held at that facility. um, I think a lot of what the activists are trying to do that really matters is bear witness and also make a real point that these facilities that were allowed to operate secretly for quite some time no longer are.
Gotcha. Is there anything else about these facilities that we should know that I haven't covered?
I think the most important thing, we published a map and list of all 170 nationwide. I'm not originally from Colorado, and I know that people in my home state of Tennessee wanted to know where the ones in Tennessee were, and friends in California wanted to know that. So we published all of them, and we're already seeing what we hoped for from that, which is local outlets in a bunch of places taking that map, taking our reporting, and going to their local facilities or calling them or digging in there. LA Taco did a great follow up on the Southern California facilities. The Courier Network has done great ones in Arizona and Pennsylvania, following up on some of this. And so, really, there's with 170 of these, it's not, we're a local outlet already kind of stretching beyond our limits by doing this. And if what we hope to be able to do there is give people in other places. So if anybody watching this, right, is like not from Colorado originally, or you have people elsewhere and they care, this map of all 170 you can find on Colorado Times Recorder. And um, I think it's easy to understand, and people in these other states will be able to pull up the hold rooms closest to them, see some information about how many detainees have been held there, about violations of the 72-hour rule, and all of that so that local activists and outlets can make the decisions and take the actions that they think are warranted in their areas.
Gotcha. And then, so next on my list, I've got the two ballot measures that were added coming up against these anti-trans ballot measures. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah, man, Protect Kids Colorado is this the group who is behind these. They are look, they're a dedicated anti-trans group, and sometimes they want to push back on that language, but I don't necessarily feel inclined to give them that linguistic leeway. We were pretty pleased last week to see Kyle Clark also refer to them as anti-trans. We've really taken the stance that that is a strictly factual description of this group. Um, it started a few years ago. This mom in Fort Collins area named Erin Lee, who felt that her child was being you know groomed in the sort of their sense, not in the real sense, at school in the Poudre Valley School District, and it has really played into the broader parents' rights furor over the last several years. And Aaron Lee has ended up hooking up with former state senator Kevin Lundberg and a bunch of other kind of transphobic Colorado politicos, and they've really animated Protect Kids Colorado into a nice little grassroots movement. And what we're looking at here is they were able to get the signatures to get an anti. I think it's one to ban gender affirming care for youths, and one is definitely to prevent transgender youth from participating in athletics, which, you know, all of the stats show that that is pointless and mean spirited, and that there is no like transgender benefit in sports or danger to other players. So there's not a factual underpinning for this. It really is this very ideological kind of Christian nationalist thing, and I think there's a lot of concern based on the fact that they were able to get these on the ballot, which, to be clear, is impressive by them. That is a little bit better than I think we probably would have guessed. I wouldn't necessarily conflate that with concern that they're going to pass. Now that's always worth worrying about, right? But being able to
Right.
get it on the ballot means that they were able to organize enough, conservatives in enough counties around the state to get it on the ballot, which is a much lower number than what you need to pass it, right? So this is an impressive organizing effort for them, and they should be proud, and we should be wary because a very right wing group pulled off something in blue Colorado that I think we wouldn't have expected. But I wouldn't jump to assuming that they're going to pull off the next step.
And another name that popped up in this story that I've noticed a trend, uh, this Womack fella seems to keep popping up in y'all's reporting on. I know y'all cover a lot of the evangelical nonsense that happens here in Colorado. Can
Mhm.
you tell us a little bit about this guy and how his name keeps popping up?
Yeah, this is my good friend Andrew Womack. Um, just kidding. He's never agreed to speak to me. Andrew Womack is a very interesting man who I've probably published more about than just about anybody. He runs the Charis Bible College in Woodland Park, Colorado. Charis has locations in more than 20 countries around the world and is part of Andrew Womack Ministries International. All of this is headquartered on this big campus in Teller County outside of Woodland Park. Beautiful campus. I've been removed from it. They are a charismatic prosperity gospel kind of thing. They're not easily categorized into the sort of taxonomy of Pentecostalism because Womack's kind of his own thing. He has some of his own specific teachings. I produced an investigative series into abuses at the Bible College a couple years ago, which I kind of got onto because Womack is the biggest proponent in Colorado of what's called the Seven Mountains Mandate, which is sort of this fundamentalist Christian plan that some embrace to take over the different mountains of society, which are like politics, education, entertainment, and exert Christian influence over those. So Womack has this very like conquering version of Christianity, and in 2021, he told his followers that they should take over the town of Woodland Park, that they should win all of the government offices, they should all, vote the same way, and they've been working on doing that. They took the school board, they failed to take the city council. So Andrew Womack is you've either I've called him cultural dark matter before. This man has millions of followers, but also you've probably never heard of him. So it's kind of this weird thing, but he pushes this very aggressive version of Christian nationalism, and they launched this political arm, Truth and Liberty, and Truth and Liberty plays into a lot of this stuff. They have been a big ally to Protect Kids Colorado. They were, I believe, the largest single donor last cycle to the opposition. Last cycle we put a right to reproductive health care in our state constitution. This ministry was the largest donor to the anti organization on that one. So they're really trying to wade in addition to trying to take over one small town, they're really trying to wade into bigger influence. So Womack is an interesting guy. He's part of that. He claims to have, brought his own son back to life. He's a very interesting man.
So Colorado has, over the past, let's say, 20 years, really moved to the left side of the spectrum. But famously, I think it used to be called the hate state,
Yeah.
and a lot of right-wing extremist groups still were either organized here or still function out of Colorado. What is it about Colorado that has these right-wing extremist groups and these evangelical groups? What is it about Colorado that brings them here?
Some of its geography, some of its broader trends. Um, we can be such a blue state, but our geography still means there can be, pockets where people are just kind of not impacted by anything going on in the Front Range and quite like it that way. So you have both on the plains and the mountains this great ability to kind of not blend in with the rest of the state. So I think a lot of these places are there's no greater urban area pressure being put on them, and so like they just kind of stay insulated, and that's I think what it is, and largely fine numerically. That's not really our big problem. Um, Starting in the middle of last century, Colorado, and particularly Colorado Springs, really became a fascination for the right wing. A bunch of the guys who launched the John Birch Society used to have some of their inaugural meetings in Colorado Springs in like the 50s. Charles Koch launched a like school for libertarian thought in Colorado Springs in the 60s or 70s. And then finally you get like focus on the family and all of that coming there. And as a result, what you get is this is a little bit of like a tortured analogy, but um, you see migration patterns because, so for instance, Nashville, Tennessee has the largest Kurdish population in the United States. I grew up around like a ton of Kurdish people, and nobody else in the United States ever meets any Kurdish people.
Never met one.
No, and amazing food, beautiful, colorful culture. Little Kurdistan in Nashville is like truly flavors that will blow your mind. But they're all kind of in Nashville as this interesting example of like when you migrate and when you naturalize, right? Like you need to know somebody and they're going to like help hook you up with the job, etc. And so there's kind of you get this gyre, this circle of gravity, and it's, eventually everybody Kurdish trying to move to the United States like, yeah, they know somebody in Nashville, and so you move to Nashville. Right wing organizations and Christian nationalist organizations, there is a ton of infrastructure and interest and money in Colorado Springs for supporting those things. Some of it was brought there by the Birchers and the Libertarians. A lot more of it was brought there by the evangelicals and moral majority. And so it's a combination of like people, bank accounts, and institutional heft. Even while the rest of the state has gone so blue, that area has a large cultural influence um,
Does
on.
the military presence there play a part?
I would imagine it does, but we also, there are changing trends in the military. The military is more diverse than the country at large. The military is also at this point better educated than the country at large. So what I mean by that, not so bluntly, is that we're seeing the military not align as much as it used to with things that signal conservatism.
Okay.
So racial diversity and higher education, those are two things that do not usually correlate most frequently with conservatism. Whereas like a largely white, largely like GI Bill kind of military, I think that was more sort of the stereotype. I imagine that the military does have an impact with those two big bases. But I think those demographics are changing, and also people stationed at bases, right, come in and come out in a couple of years. So there's always been a big transient population. If anything, the existence of a transient military population has allowed that non-transient right-wing evangelical population to solidify as the core of Colorado Springs and as the core of the area. If you have 10 or 15% that are moving in and out every 4 years, 5 years with their different postings, but the ones who are staying are focus on the family and, freedom works and all of that, they become sort of the background radiation of the area. So I think the military does have an impact, but not as much as I would have assumed before I had worked down there, I think.
And just to add on, I believe Heritage Foundation also started here by the Coors family. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was the Adolf Coors Foundation and Pete Coors. I can't recall if it was like actually registered in Colorado Springs at first, but that's one of the things that like the Cokes and Pete Coors absolutely got together to kick off, and that's frankly another reason is the Coors family are major institutional conservative donors, largely these days through the Adolf Coors Foundation. As a friend of mine said recently, I don't know much about Adolf Coors, but the fact that his first name is Adolf strikes one and two.
Yeah,
Uh,
not a good
no, not
not a
great.
good look.
Not great. But so the Coors, they're one of the big. They're now dwarfed by the Cokes and things like that. But they spend tens of millions of dollars per year on conservative issues. So there's some infrastructural stuff here that I think hasn't been swept away by the broader changes in the population.
Gotcha. I do want to jump into some more recent news. Obviously, we had state assembly yesterday. Wanted to get your thoughts on some of the results. So did you see the results? Have you looked through it
Did
yet?
I did. I was surprised by some of them. I think not surprised by others. But yeah,
I think most surprising to me was Jeff Bridges
yeah.
clearing out his two more progressive opponents, you could say, from the ballot. So, what are your thoughts on Jeff Bridges? And do progressives need to learn to consolidate?
Yeah, to the second one, yes. To the first one, I think it's a more complicated answer than I would have expected to give at a certain point. And if, Jeff, if you ever hear this, just hang with me here. Um, Immediately, kind of like the package Jeff Bridges is in feels like something I would not be interested in, like extraordinarily rich father, Greenwood Village kind of centristy. And so I've always politically, like personally, Jeff is plenty lovely and he's always been nice to me. Politically, I was always a kind of a little wary of him. Um, and in every good conversation I've had with Jeff, I have come away feeling like that wariness has been challenged. Not by him saying, "Why are you wary of me?" but because I think that I'm taking that external package and everything that Jeff Bridges is and thinking that it's going to map really neatly onto a set of policy preferences that I continually find that it doesn't. So there are, in a lot of the races we have right now, we have a good progressive versus an odious centrist. I love Brianna Titone. I think Mikos is great. I don't think that the treasurer's race fit as neatly into that. There are some votes that Jeff has taken in the Senate that I would definitely bend his ear about in a not kind way. And there are things that I think we're not on the same issue on. There's like land use stuff in particular. I think he's like really bothered some folks on. But when you talk to Jeff Bridges about what is important to you and what is important to him, I have continually found more there than I think I lazily assumed that I would. So of all of the ones that I think fall into this, even though this one is the most cartoonishly like looks like it, I think I think people might find more in Jeff than they're expecting from the rich dad exterior of it all. And I also reserve a right to be profoundly disappointed at any time, right? But Jeff has sort of continually challenged how I have tried to stereotype him in my mind.
Interesting, interesting. And then we have we failed to lose any candidates in the attorney general race, so we will now have three basically in the primary race coming up. We have
Yeah.
current Boulder County Attorney General Michael Doherty, current Secretary of State Jenna Griswold, and David Seligman, a civil rights and labor attorney. What are your thoughts on that race going into it?
Nobody's ever going to catch me writing about this race this cycle because I'm a shameless David Seligman stan. And being a shameless David Seligman stan, I could not possibly, write a column about it and try to. It's always awkward, like when you have a position to call people and try to get quotes, because I also want to be honest with them and be like, can I talk to Michael Doherty? So I'm supporting David Seligman, but I would wonder if you would give me a quote for my column. So instead, when I know that I've like really decided on something, I try to stay out of it from my column, not as an individual, right? Um, I would love to see David Seligman in the Attorney General's office. Um, he is smart. He is so genuine. You do not get any kind of like politician off of David, right?
Yeah,
Um,
in fact, he's actually been on the show. He was
Good.
a great interview. Yeah,
David, David reminds me very much of his good friend Sarah Parody, who is probably my favorite person in office in Colorado. Um, for the fact that she also has a strong moral compass and across a number of years in office now hasn't seemed to have to bend it to get the things done that she wants to get done. It is so refreshing to have people tell you what they believe and then act in a way that reassures you that they believe that. And that's really what I find in David. Um, that being said, I think it's going to be an interesting race. It's multi ways. I think we're still waiting to find out if Hetal Doshi, if her signatures. I think we haven't seen the sufficiency on that. She's been really interesting as well. Actually, I listened to her interview on Ian Silveri's podcast on Get More Smarter and came away like, oh, okay. I hadn't really taken note of her before. She seems really smart. Um, Doherty is an interesting guy as well. And of course, Jen, I think, has the SOS office stuff. I think that I understand how each of them will make arguments for themselves. Um, and I just really find myself hoping it's David Seligman.
And so I think probably the best result, although it is, somewhat disappointing, Karen Breslin, candidate for U.S. Senate, did not make the ballot.
Yeah.
Julie Gonzalez, I should say, state senator, also running for U.S. Senate, was able to kind of consolidate that progressive vote. And, as someone, I've seen Karen run before.
Mhm.
I think she's a great option. But what do you think played into that? How do you think Julie was able to consolidate that progressive vote in really just a couple months?
Yeah. Julie's very good at what she does. Um, and so is Karen, who I don't know as well, but who I moderated that forum she was in, and one thing I really appreciated about them both being in it, the discourse between two people who are left of center, or the supporters of two people who are left of center, and by center I do mean the Democratic Party. Um, it is refreshing. We don't encounter a lot of like meaningful left discourse in American electoral politics. It's either like edgelord online stuff where we're all obsessed with how we're labeling each other, and the kind of like really annoying purity test that stops us from getting anything done, or it's like us versus like Wall Street Democrat Bob, who like might as well be a Republican, and so we're not really having a meaningful conversation. So I appreciated having two genuine left people in that race, and I think that was really good. Operationally, Julie's good at what she does. Her team, her consultants are some folks I know. Michael Whitehorn, one of my very good friends, is one of the folks behind that operation, and they're good at what they do. So I would love to see Karen run for something else. I would love to see her run for the state senate or Congress or whatever
Absolutely.
else it is.
Absolutely. I hope she doesn't stop. Yeah.
Yes, there are voices that I badly want in this, and I also do confess to I think not splitting the progressive vote on the primary ballot is probably ultimately helps the chances of getting Hick out.
And that's kind of what I was leaning towards. Like, I hate to see Karen not on the ballot, but I'm also glad that we will not be splitting that progressive vote like we might be doing in some of these other races.
If we could have walked away with a Julie Gonzalez Karen Breslin ballot, great, but like unfortunately like the incumbent is going to be on there, and I think uh, again, this is another one where Colorado politics has this bad habit of having like really nice people in office. And John Hickenlooper is straight up one of them. You're never going to find somebody who tells you John Hickenlooper was an asshole to them. But his politics are very frustrating and very disappointing. And he does not have sufficient answers for a lot of the votes he's taken. And he has never, I think been principled in the ways that I would want. And he's a really nice guy. And I don't think he should be in office anymore. So it's like, it's, I think easier when people are caricatures. But I think that I was going to vote for whoever the strongest opponent to Hickenlooper was in this primary, and it has turned out to be Julie, and that's good for me. Like that's good enough for me.
Right.
And I think the more of us who can get behind her, I know it's going to be harder for people who have been strong Karen supporters, but I do hope that as time between now and June goes on, that Julie can do some outreach to them, that we can all kind of get in the same boat together and give it our best shot.
Right. And what I've heard, most of Karen's supporters are supporters because of her resume. She's a constitutional lawyer. She's, argued, she's taught law, she's a professor, she's an expert in the US Constitution, these kind of things. Where I think what Julie brought to the table was that young, fresh,
Mhm.
fiery voice that people are wanting right now.
Absolutely. Julie has the same thing I said about David and Sarah Parody is Julie tells you that she believes something and you feel that she means that. You don't feel that she said it because she thought you wanted to hear it or that she thought it was the thing that would be best for her to be seen as believing. You get the sense that she believes the thing she says she believes. And I think that that is kind of an unfakeable thing. Look, I've worked with dozens of candidates in my earlier life, and I always joked that there are like two main kinds. There are the ones who you can leave alone with voters, and there are the ones who you can't. Um, and you always want the former kind. And I think Julie is that. You can leave Julie in a room with people and she'll be like, "So what's up?" Like she'll have a normal conversation like a normal person and will also be willing to get into issues and demonstrate her skills and knowledge on something while being a normal person. It is not this like scripted, overly practiced thing. And I think that people there's this idea in like the consultariat, right? The like voters are dumb in ways that like nobody's dumb, and it just doesn't make a lot of sense the way the things a lot of these people have convinced themselves of. And I think one of the best examples of that is that like it is really hard to bullshit somebody to their face, and just because you or your candidate thinks you're succeeding at that does not mean that you are. You know what I mean? Like it's so offensive when somebody like gives you some line and you're like, man, you think that I think that you mean that, huh? But I do not. And so that's to say, I think what we're seeing is not just young progressive or young energetic progressives. We're seeing that people believe them, and I think that that cuts through an enormous amount of bullshit.
And to all of what you just said, Diana DeGette had a rough week
Yeah.
with a video coming out with her and a protester confronting her at one of her events. Um, what are your thoughts on that interaction and uh, the effects that will have on her race against primarily Milak Heroes?
As a recovering mudslinger, my initial reaction was this is going to sound so weird if you haven't like made a lot of attack ads, but you see that first little bit, and the fact that she had to jump in and finish Diana's sentence instead of Diana saying something ridiculous herself, I did feel like kind of weakened it a little bit. But then Diana like hustled, and I was that was fairly shocking to me. I haven't seen Diana move that fast in a long time. But I don't know that it. We saw in 2024 that establishment Democrats want Palestine to not matter, and it does. And will it matter in a way that's determinative of outcomes in that race? I don't know. But I think a lot of people want to soothe themselves that, like, oh, that was just a setup. Oh, that's just Sunrise Movement. But it wouldn't have millions of views across platforms if it did not embody something that a lot of people, including myself, have found to be a profound alienation from the Democratic Party. Um, I think a lot of us understand that politics involves compromises. And I think a lot of us also understand that genocide is beyond those compromises.
Absolutely.
It's not something that we can expand realpolitik towards. It's not something I am willing to expand realpolitik to. I don't need somebody to agree with me on the same contours of a two-state solution. I do need somebody to agree with me on arms shipments to an ongoing slaughter of innocents. That is not too much to ask. That is not impractical. That is not a purity test. That is a decency test. And
And the irony, I think, that it is Israel who claims to be this Jewish state. They were the ones who really taught us at a young age never again. And then to have that thrown back in our faces, like, oh, that's not what's happening. It's insulting, honestly.
it is, and it is rough. And I think this very kind of poignant irony to it, like you said, that a lot of us learned to oppose this sort of thing from the lessons of the Holocaust, as well we should have, and that that some people in power and whoever else it is are willing to kind of twist those lessons. That some things should probably be sacred, and I think the Holocaust is one of those things, and I think the genocide in Gaza is one of those things. And that's all just kind of a long way of saying that, like, Diana doesn't have to be a horrible person for me to not be able to vote for somebody who can't answer those questions. And I can't, right? Like, I know people who work on her campaign who I love. I know somebody who was in the background of that video who I love, right? And who's very sweet and who I disagree with politically, but it's so far beyond that. It is, if you give me the choice between a Democrat who supports a genocide and a Democrat who is willing to risk and lose her job to oppose that genocide, it is an easy choice for me.
Understood.
And
Let me talk real quick. I do want to cover No Kings was yesterday. Have you seen any preliminary numbers, and what are your thoughts on protest as a means to political change?
yeah, I have not seen preliminary numbers yet. I would love to. I spoke at the Colorado Springs one in October. That ended up being like 15,000. That's the benchmark I was kind of looking at for Colorado Springs numbers yesterday or when we see some. But I know some folks were saying it could have been the biggest of the three yet. I I find myself kind of like pulled around the leftist discourse about this. I think it's important discourse. Um, all right, here, just laying my cards on the table. Tell me if you ever experienced this, like as like an actual leftist, and I like read my theory, and I, R.I.P. Michael Parenti, and I genuinely care and believe this stuff. And I also find that when I zoom in on a lot of the specific fights, I take the less edgelordy position, and then I'm like, the other leftists aren't going to think I'm cool. And like that's like a weird kind of impulse, but um, like all right, man, how did I just totally lose my train of thought? Where are we going on this? You got to edit that part out. This part. Where remind me of the question.
So your thoughts on protest as a political tool?
Yeah. So like I see the discussion, right, of like this isn't radical enough. This needs to be black bloc, shatter plate glass windows. I'm not immune to black bloc. I'm not a stranger to black bloc. I make all of my TikTok videos for CTR, and in the background is a tear gas canister that was shot at me, right? Like I get it. I've breathed a lot of smoke. I've been flashbanged, um, flex cuffs, all of that. And I think that these are different use cases. I think No Kings is good. I also think that there's this kind of assumption amongst sort of online leftists that this is being organized by like Democratic Party or normie libs. And there are some normie libs, but there's also like the Denver communists helping organize No Kings, right? Like PSL helping organize No Kings. Right?
Absolutely.
There's real leftist orgs with real cred involved in this. And I appreciate that because I think it means that they understand that the use case is different. A lot of the people I know who helped organize Denver No Kings this weekend are also like experienced antifists, right? Like who have done things late at night and all that sort of stuff. What we're seeing at these protests though is the radicalization of normies. And I think that's good. I get that you show up and it feels more like a festival and that doesn't feel radical, and that people are wearing red, white, and blue and that doesn't feel radical. For a lot of those people, it's the most radical thing they've ever done. And
Right.
we've got to take them one step at a time. We have to meet them where they are. And when you see, a retiree holding a sign that implies that ICE agents should perhaps be subjected to a Nuremberg trial, that feels like a good sign. It feels like a good sign if like Deborah Blue Wave Resist 24 or whatever on Twitter is talking about strong accountability and not about bipartisanship. That feels like a good sign. So it's yes, I believe in more radical action and the time and place for more radical action. I also appreciate that oftentimes more radical action can be a trap that authoritarians are able to make a great amount of hay out of, but I think that we're having different conversations and that the utility of getting like millions of very normal people into the streets is huge. I cannot recall the stats off the top of my head, but one of the most famous papers in the last like 2 decades of political science, the authors were two women. I cannot remember their names, but it's the one about like percentage of populations engaged in mass protest movements that have toppled regimes. And so it's like People Power versus Marcos in the Philippines, a few of these others, and I think it's something like 7.5% of the population or something mobilized is more than most regimes have ever stood against. Uh, Last year, the No Kings protests were hitting a little bit more than half of that number. So, you know, it might not feel edgy like a lot of us want it to. It might not feel as immediately impactful or resistant as a lot of us want to. There's a lot of reason to believe that it matters, and there's a lot of reason to feel that the people who showed up yesterday are further left or are more realistically considering their liberalism than they were a year and a half ago.
Okay. And then finally, I did, you mentioned you kind of stumbled into
Yeah.
journalism. So I want to talk about journalism a little bit. I actually studied journalism at the University of Louisiana Lafayette. I have a degree, minor in poli sci, and very quickly learned it was not going to pay the bills. Uh,
Yeah.
so I'm actually a union construction worker during the week.
Oh, yeah.
And then I started doing this on weekends to, kind of help move things along. I saw the Democratic Party basically flailing and just reaching out for anything. And I thought, I'm going to get more involved. So this is what I do. I don't consider what I do journalism.
Mm.
It's almost more of agitprop. I'm very one-sided. I don't believe anything the Republicans say, honestly. Um, and that's one of the reasons I got out, actually, is after, 2 or 3 years in the newsroom, you very quickly learn one side is lying almost
Yeah.
all the time. Um, so, you're dealing, one of the problems I had in the newsroom was this um, obsession with being moderate or being neutral. And it's like, how do you be neutral when one side is almost blatantly evil?
You can't
Uh,
be neutral on a moving train, man. Like you can't.
so I wanted to talk a little bit. Can you tell us about Colorado Times Recorder? Who started it?
Yeah.
Y'all claim to be a progressive news organization, so tell us a little bit about that and y'all's goals.
Absolutely. This is one of my favorite topics. Um, I love CTR. I'm very proud of CTR. It was started 10 years ago by Jason Salzman. A long time ago, Jason was the longtime media critic for the Rocky Mountaineer, which is one of the longtime Denver area newspapers that died around like the 2008 crisis. But a lot of like old heads loved the Rocky. Jason was a columnist of the Rocky for a long time, like kind of like a known Denver press person, and then he went off into uh, political PR and that sort of stuff. And during the W years, he left the Rocky before it closed. During the W years, he was basically Ben and Jerry's political consultant, like Ben Cohen.
Okay.
Yeah, and he and Ben wrote like a few anti-George W. Bush books together and did some anti-Bush like activism and touring stuff. Jason was also really involved in like anti-nuclear advocacy stuff in the 80s. So he was kind of an activist who became a media critic who kind of became an activist and PR guy again, and then later refounded a media organization. Um, so we're 10 years into it was 2016 when Jason sort of came back to media and founded the Colorado Times Recorder. And we've always set out to be a progressive outlet. And I think it's that can take some finding of your legs, but what we're definitionally progressive in that like what we cover are issues that we think matter to progressivism and to progressives. It's why we've always put a focus on right-wing extremism as extremism was eating mainstream conservatism, right? Like that warranted a lot of focus. But it's why we've also, we catch flack sometimes for criticizing Governor Polis, but like Governor Polis does things that need to be criticized, and
Absolutely.
we consider ourselves not beholden to the Democratic Party, right? Like we're progressives. We're also a 501(c)(3), and both as part of being a nonprofit and as part of being an independent media outlet. The Democrats don't tell us what to do any more than the Republicans do, even if we probably agree with them on more. Um, and Jason has been really nice in letting me kind of carve out my niche there. I was really uncomfortable calling myself a journalist at first. I've been there 4 years now. I was really uncomfortable calling myself a journalist at first because I'm never going to pretend to be neutral. It's not something I'm really going to do. And I am habitually, if not pathologically, honest. I find that it's the best way to not be super anxious. Just be honest. And so I've never wanted to try to fool anybody about like where I'm coming from. Um, and what we ended up doing there was Jason let me have, the muckraker as my reported column. So it can it can be investigative and it can include my opinion because look, as a researcher for a very long time, like the facts are really important to me. And I've done everything possible to base my opinions on facts and on a synthesis and interpretation of a great many facts. But I'm not going to pretend that I don't have the opinion. And I'm not going to change or massage the facts inaccurately to justify it, right? So these days, what I really like to do is investigative work that draws conclusions because I think it's super asinine to investigate and put together all of the information and then deliver that to the audience as if you haven't been able to reach any conclusions about it, right? Just for the sake of pretending to some form of neutrality. Um, so what I always like to say is like I'm not going to try to pretend to be what I'm not. Like I was a political consultant. I still meddle quite extensively. I am an ideologue. I believe very strongly in what I believe, and there is a world that I would like to see made a reality that's not yet. And I think that what I do can be part of it. I just don't want to do it while pretending that that's not the ultimate goal, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely, absolutely.
I also,
And you hear
yeah,
a lot of reporters talk about, oh, the golden days when, we only had, three news channels and you could trust Walter Cronkite. Do you think journalism was ever actually neutral, or is it kind of, that manufacturing consent where everything was kind of already guided? I mean, everything's been owned by billionaires or corporations for the longest time. Why would they not do things in their favor?
right. And I think that's yeah, largely the case. I gave a talk at a conference in Montana a couple weeks ago actually about like changes in the media environment. And I touched on this a little bit with you're right, it has always been this way. Pre-internet, like the last few decades of the 20th century, there was at least the commercial incentives of media outlets also broadly aligned with their news incentives in that like accurate, trustworthy reporting was also the good way to get people coming back to your one of the three channels or you're one of the major newspapers, right? So like it helped you make money. With the rise of like attention economy stuff, digital advertising, etc., clicks are what make money, engagement is what makes money. And so trustworthiness doesn't really have a financial incentive anymore. So no, there's always been the like manufacturing consent, influence peddling aspect of it, but it was also in the to the financial benefit of news organizations before this big shift to be pretty accurate, and that having it, obviously there's always going to be a lens on like what they're reporting. That's pretty much entirely evaporated, and it's what we have is extremely low trust in media, right? It's one of the things that really motivates me to sometimes people are like, what are you? Like, are you an opinion columnist? Are you an investigative journalist? And it's like, I don't know. I've won awards for both of those things. Yes, I think yes. There's such low trust in media. I figure just being straight up with my readers about who I am and where I'm coming from. If anything, I have conservative readers, interestingly, and I think that there is some awareness that like because I'm like, hey, I'm like a filthy pinko writing this, that they can sort of be like, all right, at least he's being honest, and then like try to factor out like figure out how they deal with the facts that I'm reporting without trying to figure out if I'm like secretly pushing some left agenda. Because like I am on the left, I am pushing an agenda, and that's usually why I've chosen to report the story I'm reporting, not something that's influencing how I'm reporting the story I'm reporting, if that makes sense. Like
Absolutely.
I'm telling the story I think is important because of my worldview, and I'm also disclosing that worldview. At CTR we fundamentally believe that a news outlet that discloses its viewpoint is more trustworthy than one that pretends not to have a viewpoint, because like
Yes.
everybody
Thank
does,
you.
right? So we're not pretending, and that's been met with look, we'd always love more readers and more money, but like it's been met with a reassuring amount of success.
Awesome. That being said, that's all I got. Let the folks know where to find you and how they can follow you.
Yeah, man. Colorado Times Recorder on most major platforms and Blue Sky. Even though it's not a great platform, I basically can't handle Twitter anymore. I'm only posting on Blue Sky at Logan M. Davis dot Blue Sky, however that works. CTR is also there on everything. We're either CO Times Recorder or fully Colorado Times Recorder. TikTok, all of that, and anybody can sign up for our newsletter on the website coloradotimesrecorder.com. They can also, if they feel remarkably generous, they can donate to us on the website as well. And if anybody absurdly wealthy is listening, 501c3 baby, you can get a tax break off of coloradotimesrecorder.com.
Very nice. Very nice. All right, Logan, it's been great. Thanks for
Yeah.
coming on today, and looking forward to getting this posted and everybody checking it out.
Yeah, man, let me know how I can signal boost or whatever. I'm super glad you're doing this. I think, frankly, being able to like make the mental space to do this while holding down another job is like very real and something that I'm not sure I could do. So it's much appreciated. Of
It's getting rough. It's getting rough. And yeah, appreciate you, man. Thanks for coming on.
course, dude, I will talk to you soon.
You too. Bye. Thank you. I did, however, forget to